This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Paul Hendricks. Paul is the Executive Director of the Conservation Alliance, a coalition of more than 270 businesses working together to protect wild places across North America. Founded nearly 4 decades ago by Patagonia, REI, the North Face, and Kelty, the Conservation Alliance has grown into one of the most important forces in conservation, pooling dollars, influence, and a collective business voice to support grassroots campaigns that keep public lands and waters healthy for generations to come. At a time when those places are under constant pressure, the Conservation Alliance is showing that businesses don't have to sit on the sidelines. They can be a powerful part of the solution. Paul's own path to this role winds through some of the most interesting corners of the conservation and environmental worlds. After earning a few advanced degrees, he started at Global Greengrants Fund, working with grassroots activists around the globe. He then joined Patagonia's legendary environmental team, where he learned firsthand how a company can weave values into every decision. From there, he helped build sustainability programs at Rivian, tackling the climate footprint of a car company from the inside. And woven through all of that is a through line of humility, service, and adventure. In this conversation, Paul and I talk about the roots of his love for the outdoors, the mentors and lessons that shaped his career, and what it's like to step into the hot seat as a first-time executive director. We dig into the Conservation Alliance's mission and why business advocacy matters, the current threats facing public lands, and how Paul stays grounded in turbulent times. We also talk about family, leadership, failure, and why hope is not just possible, but necessary. It's a candid, thoughtful conversation with someone who's not only shaping the future of conservation, but doing it with humility, persistence, and just enough humor to keep it human. I've had the privilege of knowing Paul for almost 15 years. We met when he first moved to Colorado, became running and climbing partners, and we've logged more hours together in the mountains and had more meaningful conversations than I can count. Watching him grow into this role has been inspiring, both for the positions he's held and for the way he's carried himself along the way. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoy. All right, Paul. How funny is this?
This is awesome.
I was trying to remember when you and I actually met for the first time, and I think you started at Global Greengrants. I looked on your LinkedIn, December 2010.
Yeah.
And I remember we met at a Christmas party. So it must have been that.
Yeah.
And my wife is like she's like the filter between me and the outside world. And she had told me about you a few days before and was like, I think you're really going to like this guy, Paul, that I work with. And I'm like a notorious hermit. I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. And then it turned out you're like the one guy in history that was one of my running partners. Yeah. Like I don't want to run with anybody, but you and I have spent so long together. So, but it's funny, like all the if probably hundreds of hours we spent together, there's still a lot of stuff about you that I'm not fully clear on. Like I know so much about you, but thinking about it from a podcast perspective, this gives me the opportunity to ask you tons of questions. So can you talk about one thing that's come up, we've been talking about recently, is the relationship with you and your dad and how he introduced you to the outdoors. Can you talk about growing up, kind of where you grew up and your relationship with your dad and how he kind of introed you to the outdoors? Because I feel like the outdoors is obviously so important to you and has shaped kind of your entire career.
Totally has. Yeah. And sometimes there hasn't been a direct thread that I've been able to see at the moment, but looking back,
it all makes sense.
Yeah, it all makes sense. Was very fortunate to have grown up with parents and specifically a dad who just valued adventure, outdoors, nature, and also grew up in an area that was surrounded by that. Like most of my childhood memories are with at my family's place up in northern Michigan, where it's National Lakeshore around everything that where we were. And I would just spend the summers just exploring the woods, going out with bare feet, trumpeting in rivers. And so I think, that just connection is so important and just has pulled me through, hard times, through work and personal side of things, and very fortunate, right? Like I know so many people, especially so many kids these days, don't have that opportunity to explore nature. So I don't take it for granted.
Yep.
But very fortunate to have that. And then also, my dad from day one was always the one who was pulling us outdoors.
Yeah.
Right? I think, he, right after college, he actually bought a motorcycle really cheap. And I think he said it was way overpowered and he gave it away at the end of the trip, but bought a motorcycle, bought a climbing rope, and his buddies, they just went out west and they climbed Rainier and Longs and Adams and all these places and just like explored. And that sense of adventure carried through how he raised me as a kid. And so we would just do the same thing on our summers. We'd go explore, we'd go backpacking up in northern Michigan, we'd go to Montana. But even more so too, that just the sense of exploration was just built into who we were as a family. Like I remember getting, Alpinist magazine or Backpacker magazine, or even, was it Sierra Trading Post? Like
I remember that.
Right.
Yeah.
That thing, I would just flip through that for hours looking at all the cool gear. And like, this is what I want to like.
Sierra Trading Post, it was like hand drawn. It wasn't like pictures. Yes. It was drawn.
Yeah. On like newspaper.
On newspaper. Yeah.
Hand drawn. And you'd place an order by a PO number and you wouldn't know actually what it looked like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really neat. I've completely forgotten about Sierra Trading Post. So, you grew up there, obviously, connected to the outdoors. When you went off to college, what was the plan? I'm always curious about that with people, particularly like at the point where we are now, where they've kind of created these really cool careers, because a lot of times it seems like maybe the plan wasn't perfectly in place back then.
There was, I don't even know if I had a plan going into college.
Was it always expected that you would go to college? Like, was there ever a question? Like for me, there was no question. I was going to go to college. Yeah.
4 years school. And I went in, is it engineering?
Oh, okay.
And then all of a sudden I got into calculus 4. I'm like, this,
oh, wow,
this sucks. Like, this isn't fun. And so I pivoted, and I studied business, Spanish, and then secondary education. So at some point in that whole 4-year period, I decided, I loved engaging and training, inspiring kids. And so I thought I wanted to be a teacher. Like that's kind of the natural path towards things. And it was great, but I also didn't want to teach kids how to conjugate verbs for the rest of my life. And so, but I knew I wanted to get involved in some sort of, I don't know what you call it, like social environmental service, right? So like, it's not gonna be a teacher. What do I do? And we've talked about this over many of the nights where I used to crash on your couch and go trail running in the morning. Where I grew up was, is in Michigan, which is, a very churched area. And so how I grew up in terms of how you give back to the community, it's like through the church. And so I actually went and studied theology after undergrad thinking, hey, I want to work with youth. I want to, be kind of do good in the world. And I'm going to do this through a parachurch organization. I want to do it through a church. And so I went to study theology, which was great. But so I went out to LA. I went to school out in LA. And at the time I took 2 jobs working, to help pay for school and get things through. One of them was I ran the night shift at a homeless shelter. It was an emergency shelter. So it was, people who would come in and they need a cot to stay in. And I worked with the family side of things. And, I would come home from work just devastated and demoralized. Like, how are these kids living in a car, right? And I'm so fortunate to be able to pay to go to grad school and all these things. But what I was finding at the time, and I know this is a broad brush that I don't want to paint on everything, but for me, I was seeing this huge gap between a lot of the stuff I was studying and seeing in the church and the day-to-day needs of community. Mm-hmm. And I kind of had a little bit of a collapse of my faith construct at the time, and which, is probably a much larger conversation to have at some point. But the other job that I had there was I actually worked at Patagonia at the retail store in Pasadena. My best buddy, who's my roommate, who he was working there. He said, "Hey, we need some extra help." So I took a part-time job working at the Patagonia store. And he always says I was the worst employee ever because I would go to the back cash register, which was like super low traffic, and I would be studying. I would put my books in the register drawer, nice. And I was just like, I wouldn't actually go like fold the clothes or do anything like that. But what that did for me is that at this time I kind of had a little bit of a, what am I going to do in life? Like, I don't think I want to go down this theology route anymore. What do I want to do? And I was working at Patagonia, and all of a sudden I started reading Yvon Chouinard's books. Yep. I started reading all the stuff that they produce. Nonprofits would come in and do slide presentations. And then also folks like Dean Potter, Timmy O'Neill, Sonny Trotter would come in, and like, this is it. Like, this is what I want to focus in on. And this is the community that I find they really found the connection between adventure, which I was still doing, and nature. And that was probably that unlock moment for me in terms of my vocational trajectory, that I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to get into the environmental work, and I want to make a difference through this, working on the daily stuff, working on the problems that we face as a society, and put it out there. And so that was kind of, that crux moment that I think from a vocational side of things, but also from a recreational side, like, the day after Dean Potter came in and gave a talk about Iraq, my buddy and I went to Joshua Tree and taught ourselves how to trad climb.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And I was like, it's a surprise we're still alive. Yeah. But like, I was like, there was this like nice interaction between community and what we were doing and vocation and calling. And that's kind of how that kind of manifests itself through.
Did it ever cross your mind, or did you worry about, there's this idea of the sunk cost fallacy, like, well, 100%. I put in all this time into this and I don't want to waste it, quote, wasted the time. Maybe I should just stick to what I know versus, because that's a pretty big shift in some ways. Like, at the time, looking back, it all makes sense. But I think that's a pretty big shift. Was there feedback from friends, family, anything about you kind of making that? So did you went straight from that grad school Patagonia experience to Green Grants? There
was one stop in between.
What was that?
In that I went back to school again. I've got way too many degrees.
No, that makes sense.
So I went and did a year-long program at University of Chicago.
Okay. I remember that.
Yeah, environmental policy and international relations.
And so from there to Global Greengrants Fund.
Yep. So I definitely had the sunk cost mentality in my mind. Like, I just put 3 years into this, ton of money, ton of energy, and realistically a lot of what I thought was going to be my trajectory for life. But I just knew philosophically, like, that could always be the foundation of why I do things, right? Spirituality, community, all those things. But it just wasn't the vocation, and it wasn't the full thing that was going to pull me forward. And I knew that if I kept going down that path, it wasn't going to be what I wanted to do. So it was hard. I took some time off and had a little bit of a full on, you can imagine a little bit of a collapse of your constructs of so many different aspects of your life kind of all come into each other, and you had to figure out how to build yourself out of that. But I had that sunk cost issue for a while, and then I kind of moved past.
Just got moving.
And said, what, next thing I got to do, I got to train myself to do what I want to do. And that's where I went into, studying environmental economics and in environmental policy and all those types of things. And the next step was a very vocational focused thing, condensed, and haven't looked back.
And so, not to go through every single step of the career, but talk a bit about Global Greengrants Fund, because that's where my wife used to work and where y'all work together. And so that would have been your first real on the ground job in the environmental world. How did you convince them you were the guy to be hired for that role? And then looking back, what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I have no clue how I convinced them. Because I think I even just interviewed over the phone. This is pre-Zoom and all that. Yeah. And I was in Chicago at the time just looking for a job.
2010, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was probably because they paid so little and no one else wanted the job. But that was a great experience, and then so that group worked with a lot of activists on the ground who were all over the world, developing countries, trying to stop to be honest with the negative harms of corporations, right? Whether it be Shell Oil down in the Amazon or any other places around the world. I love that work, but for me, I think this was another kind of influx moment. I just didn't always I wanted to work upstream in the kind of harm to solution continuum, and said, if we're sitting here trying to mitigate the negative impacts of corporations, why don't I try to move upstream a little bit and make sure that those impacts aren't as great? And so from there, from Green Grants, I remember having a lot of chats with you on runs. Like I got a job offer at Patagonia to work in their grants and advocacy program. And at the time, from a strict job side of things, it was like the dream job.
Oh, yeah.
Like Patagonia, get to go back there, get to work in the corporate office. You know, you and I had talked so much about let my people go surfing and all these things. But it was hard because I was moving out to California alone. But I ultimately made that choice, and I'm so glad I did, because talk about a real training ground to learn about what business can be and what it can do and the positive impact it can have on the world. Yeah. It was one of the best decisions other than marrying my wife.
I remember, I think this is right. This is my memory, at least. We were doing Green Mountain, and it was like, it was at night. We used to always do it at night. And, we were talking about it, and I remember thinking, like, I remember telling you, it's not a good comparison, but I was like, if you want to be in banking and you get a job offer at Goldman Sachs, even if you don't have any intention of being there for the rest of your life, like what better training ground and to have it on your resume. And I feel like in your world of, environmental, combining business and environmental, there's nowhere better.
Nowhere better.
And it was awesome. You work very closely with Rick Ridgeway, right?
Yes.
Can you talk about what you learned from him? Because so I had him on this podcast. People can go back and listen if you haven't heard that. And then I got together with him last time I was out there, and he showed me all the turtles. Yeah. And
he lives out of the Turtle Conservancy. Yeah.
And it was awesome. But you always speak so highly of him as a mentor. What'd you learn from him?
Yeah. I mean, so when I started there, Rick he led the environmental team.
Yep.
And I remember, and this is not answering your question, but I remember my first day going into Patagonia, so nervous, right?
Oh, sure.
This was like going to Goldman Sachs.
And you were right there in Ventura at the place.
Yep. Right there in Ventura. Didn't know a single person. Walking in there, and I walk down the hallway, and I see Yvonne Chenard. Like, oh, okay. Yeah. Got a little nervous. And then I go to sit at my desk, and my boss was kind of showing me around, and Rick is, 2 desks away from me. And he's sitting there on the phone, feet up on his desk, no shoes on, shorts, ratty t-shirt, right? Because Rick is the king of just using stuff till it wears out. Yeah. And he's on the phone, and he's like, Brokaw, what are you doing today? And I look at my boss, like, is he talking to Tom Brokaw right now? He's like, yeah. So, I mean, Rick is such an amazing person. And he and I related on work as well, as we were both big climbers, right? So we always tried to find, like, hey, what lessons are you pulling from your climbing career into work and everything? And I learned so much from Rick, but one of the biggest things I learned from him, and he would always say this, because he's known for a lot of the successes of Patagonia. Yep. But what you don't know is there's so many things that he just got shot down. Really? Yeah. Yeah. He's like, you got to just keep pushing forward. Keep pushing forward. It's like alpine climbing, right? You're going to get a horrible storm and you're going to get stuck in your tent for a few days. You're going to have to change routes. But what's important is you have that vision out there. And if you truly believe it's a good idea and you truly believe it's where you are, you got to work your ass off to get there. Mm-hmm. And you're going to get shot down along the way. You need to adjust your tactics, your messages, your messengers, and pull things forward. And so just the tenacity that he brought to work, which I think you don't see unless you're on the inside, was amazing. He worked so hard to push some of that stuff through, and he got shot down way more than you'd think he did, but he pulled through. And that's one thing that he always taught me. He was like, just keep going. If it's a good idea, believe in it and keep it going.
That's funny you say that, because I've been thinking about that a lot with several different things I have going on. And I love studying people like Rick and just these interesting people that have managed to do so much. And that seems to be one of the common themes is if somebody tells them no, it's not like they're being disrespectful, but they just don't accept that.
Yeah.
I mean, or they take it on as, well, I didn't explain it correctly, or these people aren't understanding what I'm saying. But this kind of, there's a difference between being like a pushy, almost like a bully, and what you're talking about, but just this kind of refusal to stop.
Yeah.
I think it's funny you say that, because I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. So, like, what were some of the big lessons you learned just from Patagonia in general, thinking about where you are now? I mean, there are a million different lessons, I'm sure, and we're going to talk, obviously, about the Conservation Alliance, but like, what were some of the big things you learned that you apply to your day-to-day work now?
One of the big things that I always was so impressed with, and a lot of this came from the leadership of Yvonne and Rick and others, was that if you focus on the process, if you do the right thing the entire time, the result is going to be what you want. That sometimes we get focused so much on the end result, and we take so many missteps in misguided directions along the way.
Yep.
I remember Yvonne, it might be in his book, but I remember him talking about this at some all company types of things. He always talked about archery. Like, if you train yourself, if you get the right equipment, if you get your breathing regulated, and you aim at the target, you're going to hit the target, right? Versus focusing on the target and not in kind of piecing everything together along the way. Yep. And I think that was something that we always, sometimes it was frustrating of what a high standard that Patagonia held us to in terms of every single step. We covered, if we're going to make a decision, we wanted to know what every single person, every single stakeholder had input on. It's not like it was death by committee, but it's what are the blind spots we have? What are the things right? And so doing things the right way and not compromising was so important.
Process over the end goal. That's that guy. I'm obsessed with the football coach, Nick Saban, and that's his whole thing. And I don't care about college football one bit. Yeah. I couldn't name a single college football player. But that's his whole thing too. It's just this process. Don't think about winning the game. Don't think about 3 plays from now. Think about process. Yep. And that seems to be another common theme among the kind of people I admire.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about what you have right in front of you. And I think one thing for me personally, I didn't learn this at Patagonia, but I think it relates, is that I've been reading a lot of Stoicism.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that type of thing. It's like, you can control what's in your span of control today. And so how are you going to do the best at that? Right. And don't get too far in front of yourself. Don't get too far in your ski tips, but do the best at what's in front of you and in your control. Now, I think that it marries with the other lesson that I pulled at Patagonia, which is also dream big. It's not like you look in front of you and focus on process and only have process. You do have those big lofty goals, but that's going to pull you forward is if you get the process along the way. And Rick was such an amazing person when we think about dreaming big. Like his big idea is starting the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and the whole don't buy this jacket idea of just let's start a reuse program. Huge things that people never would have thought of, but he had the vision, and then you do the things the right way along the way, and you're going to be there.
When did you know it was time to move on from Patagonia? Because it seems like you could very easily spend a career there and constantly be challenged. Because I've gotten to know Patagonia pretty well through this podcast, and some of the folks there have been super supportive. And it's one of these companies. With me, I can be kind of cynical or questioning like people's motives and like they're full of shit, but they act like a certain way. But the thing about Patagonia is, what I've seen is the deeper you dig, for me at least, the deeper I dig, the more impressive it is, and the more. It's really just amazing to me that the level of commitment. Like, I interviewed Vincent Stanley and read his book. And when you really see that you can't fully explain how dedicated the people there are and how legit everything is. If greenwashing's on one end of the spectrum, they're on the complete other end. And so like what was the thought process of, all right, I'm ready for a new challenge?
I mean, I guess to that point, I eventually got to the realization that Patagonia is always going to do the right thing. Yeah. Right. The people there are always going to pull the company forward, the leadership, whether it be the Chenard family or every single person on the floor at the retail stores is always going to do the right thing. And for me, I was just looking to say, hey, where can I take what I've learned here and bring it somewhere else? That a company, whether it's younger in their trajectory or older in their trajectory and they're trying to course correct, how do I take what I've learned here and try to just expand my influence? Like that was a huge part of the reason I went from Patagonia to Rivian, right? Was this company, RJ Scaringe, who started it, is an amazing leader, started a company, and he was very honest. He said, I'm trying to make the Patagonia of the car world, right? And so that was one of those opportunities. I said, you know what, Patagonia is going to do it. They don't need me there, but can I take what I learned there and apply it somewhere else? And so I made that shift to Rivian, which, that was a huge, hard decision to learn. Patagonia is not just a company, it's a family, right? And so but I made the decision in part because of what I just talked about, but also, they brought me in to help lead their climate efforts. And if you look at the climate footprint of a car company versus an apparel company, it's like junior high football compared to the Super Bowl, right? Sure. In terms of size of impact. And so I jumped in at Rivian, and that was an amazing experience, totally different type of realm. The mission, the values were all there, but a car company, a startup, a tech startup in crazy economic times, trying to grow huge. And then when I went, I started at Rivian prior to them being public.
And so that was like 2021, 22. It was like post-pandemic, right?
It was kind of in the middle. In the middle.
Okay.
Yeah, it was when my daughter was born. Yeah, talk about bad decisions in life. We had a second kid. We quit our jobs. We moved to a city we had no clue of anyone. we almost lost it.
Well, good thing everything is perfectly even and calm at this point, right?
It's so calm in the world right now, isn't it? I think this is agnostic to Rivian, but the reality is that they were doing the right thing, and RJ is pulling that company forward through mission and values, and they're trying to really reframe the impacts of the car industry and bring it to zero if possible. But the pressures on public companies are just totally different.
Well, it's just the incentives are all screwed up.
It's all screwed up.
And Chenard talks about that all the time, but it's just this quarterly hustle. And I don't know. I went to business school, the whole thing, but I just don't understand it. It's not sustainable. And I've thought about it a lot, and I don't understand how it's sustainable in any way when you're thinking quarterly.
It's not sustainable, right? You have so many pressures from financial returns, and a lot of this work that that I've done in my career, and I know you have thought about and done, it doesn't have quarterly timelines. And so that it's 2 years, it's 4 years, it's 10 years to see something to fruition when you're thinking about long-term environmental change or supply chain management or product switching around of different product mixes, and it just doesn't align with the shareholder demands on a quarterly. And so I think we're stuck in this hard place where you've got these amazing leaders, amazing people in these companies who want to do the right thing, and there's sometimes you hit a wall, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that. I think Rivian is pushing through and doing a great job of what they are. So I don't want to make that sound bad on them. I love them as a company, but it's just hard. The economic incentives are off, and we've talked about the whole stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism, and was it John Eldridge? Was that the guy who wrote that thesis?
I think so. Yeah.
So long ago, and I fully believe in that, but there's something else that has to change, because the practitioners who are pushing this forward on the daily are, we can constantly feel budget constraints. You feel personnel changes and everything like that.
I remember there was like round after round of layoffs, and your job was still there, and then one day it wasn't.
Exactly.
And so because I remember I would pay attention. I don't pay attention to the car company. I try not to look at the news, but just because of our personal connection, I would, every time I'd see something about it, I'd read it, and I was like, oh man, I hope Paul's doing all right. But eventually, those pressures led to your job not being there.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, 2 small kids, And I would imagine it was kind of a freak out moment, maybe. Or did you know? I mean, did you know it was coming? Had you started doing kind of thinking contingency plans? What was the scene in your brain when that came down, when you got that news?
Yeah, it was definitely a freak out moment.
Because you got a new house.
Totally. Yep. Got 2 kids, a job,
mortgage,
all that fun adult stuff. And, I had been through 4 rounds of layoffs at the time and had to lay people off. And so that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, was having to let people go. It was so hard. But then all of a sudden it hit, right? I got a meeting put on my calendar and it was done. But I think there's a couple things in there. At the time, my boss, PJ Simmons, who is an absolutely amazing person and great friend still, we just sat on this, actually, we were on a Zoom call and we canceled the Zoom call and just went to FaceTime. And
really?
We both just bawled because we had such a close relationship with each other, and we were building something that was going to last a long time, right?
Yeah.
The foundation and the advocacy program and all that. And so freak out moment for sure. Called my parents, I went to the extreme, like, what am I going to do, Dad? I don't know. I don't have a job, but they had a great package. And I think what I did during that time was, I was kind of in the dumps for a couple days, but to the stuff that Rick and I would talk about, and we've talked about, like, you got to get up.
Yeah.
And you got to get back out there. It doesn't mean you just constantly push forward in a certain direction. Sometimes you turn and you look the other way and you go that direction. And so I just started going. I would drop my kids off at school in the morning and I would just go up to the mountains. I'd do uphills at Winter Park. I would go, run up in Indian Peaks or whatever, and just take a little bit of time to say, like, what do I actually care about? What is going to pull me through from just a passion and a calling side of things. And, I kept coming back to this. Like, I do believe that businesses have an amazing potential for positive impact in the world. And I didn't want to leave that nexus of businesses and conservation and impact and driving forward a new narrative in terms of what a business can be, and also a new narrative of what we feel the value of our natural resources can be.
Yeah.
That it isn't just extraction, that there's so many economies that are built on them for the long term. And I knew I wanted to be in that world still. I had actually found, I kind of came over that realization. And then, because I didn't have a job, I was like, well, world's my oyster right now, kids. Do you want to go on a 2-week road trip? And so we hopped in our van and we went west. We eventually made it out to California. And on the way out there, I got a message from the board chair at the Conservation Alliance, who I knew from Rivian, because Rivian was a member and Patagonia was a member.
Yep.
And she said, hey, I know what's going on. Any interest in this job posting I'm going to send out tomorrow? And it was for the executive director role at TCA.
Yep.
I said, I'm going to be in your neck of the woods tomorrow.
Holy cow, I didn't know that story.
Yeah, I was like, you want to have coffee? And so we went out for coffee. Annie and I work. She's amazing. She works for Peak Design, who's a huge member and supporter of TCA. And we had coffee, and it just, I just immediately got excited. I had been in the Conservation Alliance realm for years because, Yvonne and Patagonia started it 35 years ago. Yep. We were members at Patagonia. My first DC lobbying trip was with TCA in Patagonia. Rivian was a member. And so it's like, this is it. Mm-hmm. This is great. And so went through the interview process, and I don't know why they took me.
I didn't realize, and so I was just thinking about just how your career had lined up to make you really the perfect candidate for that. Because you'd worked on the ground conservation, environmental work, advocacy at Green Grants. And I feel like with Green Grants, that's about as granular as you can get. They're taking in $10 million and giving out $4,000 grants. And then all the way up to a car company. And with Patagonia there in the middle, the ultimate training ground. The only thing that seemed like it had not been in there, is like you'd obviously had a team, you'd led people, you had to do the hard work with the team, laying people off. Was there any nervousness or concern on your part about like, oh man, I'm in charge here. Like it, that's a big deal. Cause we've talked about when you're in charge of whether it's your own little business or, a super important thing like you're doing, it never ends. Like you wake up in the middle of the night and there's, you're at the, you're at the top and it all comes back to you. So was there any nervousness about that?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, every day I feel I have imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Like, am I the right person for this? But
have you read Think Again by Adam Grant?
No.
You should read that. There's a whole chapter about how imposter syndrome can be one of the best leadership things you can have.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't read the book, but I think it instills some humility, which is needed. Right.
It definitely.
If you don't think
how weird would it be if you just think, I'm 100% right here. Yeah. I mean, that's a sociopath or a psychopath or something. If you don't consider anybody else's opinions, maybe.
Yeah. And there's a lot of those leaders out there.
Yeah, there are.
But I think that humility is good. I do remember the first day calling onto our staff meeting at TCA and someone asked a question about a decision. And I just kind of sat there and all of a sudden everyone looked and like, Paul, that you need to say yes or no right now.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's growth. I mean, like leadership's hard. It can be the most rewarding thing in the world. And I like being able to enable a team to thrive in their work, but also as whole people is the greatest thing, similar to parenting, right?
Yes.
That you have this responsibility. It's a lot, sometimes the burden of that falls hard, but the opportunity and the positive impact you can make on not just the 7 people who are on the TCA team right now, but so many others that impacts. There's a sense of responsibility that is exciting. It's almost like getting, toeing the line at 5 a.m. for a 50K. Like there's that little bit of that nervous energy that I think there's a responsibility. There's a huge journey ahead, but you've trained, you've got the right people, you've got the right crew out there, and you can pull through it. And but learning every day.
No, I mean, I think that nervousness is, I don't like it in the moment, but I feel like I'm at my best when there's it means I'm doing something important. I've often thought the word nervous, how they say like Native Americans, they have like 100 different words for snow. Like up in Alaska, they'd have 100 different words for snow. And I always say I'm nervous, but I think there's like 100 different words for what I mean by nervous,
totally.
And I think that just, for me, a lot of the time it means, all right, this is important and that's good. This is a good sign. So for people not familiar with the Conservation Alliance, give me the pitch, give me the story. What is it? What do y'all do? What's the mission?
So the Conservation Alliance started 37 years ago by Patagonia, the North Face, REI, and Kelty, 4 of the titans of the outdoor industry. And at the time, all the CEOs and founders got together and they said, we're building these businesses on the backbone of healthy lands and waters. Every other industry out there in the world does work to ensure the long-term sustainability of their assets at large. This is one of our biggest assets. We need to be doing a bit more to make sure that these landscapes are protected, because if they're not, we don't have products to sell. Customers aren't going to go out there. Employees aren't going to go out there. And it's actually a threat to our existence as an industry. And so they got together and they pooled, I think, $10,000 each into a $40,000 fund. And they made a grant out the door, said, okay, we're going to start funding grassroots organizations who are doing work to protect these landscapes. And for a long time, it was very much a grant-making organization. Money would come in, they attracted more companies. And for a long time, it's been very focused on the outdoor industry. And so they made grants out the door, supporting grassroots organizations going forward. And then a few years ago, they realized that businesses hold a really unique position in society right now. And I think in our current political environment, certainly, but any political environment where money talks, numbers talk, economics talks, and there is a huge value in taking the voice, so not just the financial investments of the outdoor industry of businesses, but taking the voice of businesses and bringing that into the advocacy realm. Direct meetings with decision makers, engaging customers, supporting campaigns at large to make the case that conservation and the protection of our lands and waters is absolutely integral to our bottom line. That, yes, there's altruistic messages that get out there for sure, but it's ultimately, there's a business case for protecting these lands and waters. And so 37 years later, we've got two big programs. One of them is we still collect money from our member companies. We've expanded beyond the outdoor industry, and we support 30 to 40 grassroots organizations every year who are doing key campaigns that are most relevant to our members, ones we feel like we have the biggest opportunity to make a difference in. And then we have an advocacy program where we bring the business voice to conservation. So, the pitch line or the tagline is that we're the business voice for conservation. We harness the power of businesses to make sure our land and waters stay healthy for generations to come.
And so the people who listen to this podcast a lot, they would have heard the interview I did with Adam Kramer from the Outdoor Alliance. So his model at the Outdoor Alliance is it's kind of getting a collective voice for all the different smaller outdoor groups. And in your business, you're getting a collective voice for all these outdoor for-profit companies. Is that it? Like, if you had to boil it down, is that?
Yeah, exactly. They work with the user groups out there. We're taking the businesses. We have weekly calls with Outdoor Alliance,
do you really?
Association. Yeah, we're in a coalition called Protect America Outdoors, where the three groups, TCA, OIA, and OA, come together, and we're trying to push forward that larger narrative around the outdoor industry, whether it be user groups through Outdoor Alliance, the businesses through us.
So you talked about when you started at Rivian and you moved here, and your wife's pregnant with a little baby, and this chaos of starting a new job. And it seems like you kind of timed the chaos pretty perfectly for conservation. You didn't time it, but like we were talking about before we started recording, I feel like this is the most chaotic moment in public lands history. And as I was saying, I always reveal myself as being kind of a dumbass on this podcast, but I was like, I never thought the threats were real. I thought, it's the kind of thing, if you took the pressure off, I could see people trying to capitalize, but I never would have imagined the level of the attacks on public lands that have come out over the last few months. It's really beyond anything I could have imagined, and I'm not even deeply immersed in it like you are. So, very broad question, but what are you thinking? What are the priorities of Conservation Alliance? How are you even finding? I feel like you're like a boat in the middle of a massive hurricane. Like, how do you even begin to get a compass reading or know where you are or where you're supposed to be going? What are you doing?
Yeah, I took the job in August of last year when I think you were in the middle of the Biden-Harris administration, which had a lot of tailwinds, and now we're kind of in a different political environment. And I think you know me enough that I'm not a hyperbolic person.
Right.
Try to stay.
You're very calm
as steady, much as possible, but this is just a full-out attack on our public land systems and the agencies that run them right now that we're facing. And I don't think that's a hyperbolic.
No, and I think if you talk to individuals, I'm not talking about companies or lobby, but individuals across the full political spectrum, they would agree with that.
Yes.
I think you take the most right wing or the most left wing, and they're on the same page. If they're people that enjoy the outdoors in one way or another, I think they all agree with that.
Yeah, they do. They 100% do. And so, I think it's hard sometimes, right? We set our priorities at the beginning of the year, and I don't think we knew everything that was going to be coming our way. For example, the USDA has just announced an intention to roll back what they call the roadless rule, which protects 58 million acres of national forest across the U.S. We didn't see that one coming. And so what we're trying to do is, stay disciplined, right? And not just respond to every single thing that comes in the door. I think that's a strategic tactic that, what they always call flood the zone, right? So we're really focused in on a couple of the big, large, pervasive issues that impact our businesses, impact recreation, and have a lot of significance to tribal and other underserved communities. And so we're focused on, we were engaged in the public land sell-off issue this summer, still keeping an eye on towards that type of thing.
That was a great success.
It was a huge success. Yeah. And I think and I'll get this in a second, I think, but in terms of, we're focused on a lot of things like national monuments, and we're in Alaska and all those different things. But what I think is the most important thing that we at TCA and we as the community at large need to focus in on right now is building a resilient and a robust narrative around the actual value of our public lands to all Americans. I think the public lands sell-off issue was one of those, hopefully not a flash in the pan moments, where all of a sudden you saw a ton of people coming out of the woodwork saying, no, too much, too far. We may not agree all on the use of our public lands across different user groups, but they do hold value to us in their some sort of protected state.
Yep.
And I think that was an amazing opportunity. I think we need to figure out how to parlay that into upcoming efforts. Colorado College comes out with a poll every year where they poll sentiment around public lands and waters across the West. Every year, like, public sentiment around public lands increases. It's 75% people want public lands protected versus opened up to oil and gas and extraction. But, and that's got to be one of the few, if not the only issue we're facing right now, where you have 75% of America aligned on something. It might be the last truly nonpartisan issue out there. I'm sure there's others. Obviously invested in
I agree with you on that.
Yeah. But the problem is that politics aren't following that. And I think there's shame on us for not having, pulled out the real value to every American in terms of, hey, these are your national treasures that every other country in the world is so jealous of. They're public. They're the great, Chris Winter, former Access Fund executive director, he's up at CU now. He had a great quote. He's like, it's the great equalizer. You can be a billionaire and you can be just out of college or, living at a college student, and you can use public lands in the same way. And I don't think people realize that. And I think the public land sell-off issue this summer was one of those moments when people started to pull at that a little bit. But we've got a job in front of us, and I think this is probably what is pulling me through the multiple hurricanes that we're facing right now, is that there's an opportunity right now to reframe the narrative around public lands and waters in a way that resonates with all people in this country. And if we can do that in the right way, it's going to be hard, but if we can do that, then we might be able to create a movement that's resilient and robust going forward for 2 years and 4 years and 6 years and 8 years in every political cycle going forward.
So, what's been missing from the story? Because I feel like everybody, just in general, everybody's got different priorities. Me and you we were looking at the Sierra Trading Post magazine when we were little, and the outdoors has always been so important, but there are tons of people, they don't care about the outdoors. It's not like they hate it, but they just don't care. So, when you think about the storytelling around public lands, what has been missing? Because I feel like you could hit it from so many different angles. The beauty, the recreation, the economic impact. I think that in a lot of ways, that might be your best bet for speaking to everybody. The importance. How do you envision there being a better way to do it? Does that make sense?
And there's probably a lot of different aspects to that question in terms of what's the message, what are the messengers that we get out there? Because you said some people don't care, but they might not know that they care about it.
Yeah.
Right? They don't know that a local trail or a local park is part of this, public lands system overall. And so part of it's just bringing to light education. Oh, totally. It's pulling in the right people too. And, in the sell-off issue this summer, there was a huge effort to pull in folks who might be a little bit more right-leaning. I think that's a great effort. We also cannot abandon people in the whole spectrum. Like we cannot, it's not a shifting of focus, it's a widening of our aperture in terms of who we bring into this. But for us, we're really focused on the economics. Like we know right now, especially dollars and cents talk. Secretary Burgum of the Department of Interior has publicly said, he sees public lands as a balance sheet. So how do we bring the narrative that actually, if you're talking about assets, you're talking about financial viability, that recreation actually generates more revenue than oil and gas extraction on public lands? How do we switch that narrative and not pit it against each other? And this isn't an energy versus recreation. This is actually it's about jobs. It's about large economic growth, and it's about sustained economic growth. The problem goes back to the quarterly returns conversation that you and I had, is that long-term economic growth is longer than 2 years and 4 years. And so we're stuck similarly in a political cycle where people aren't always looking at that long-term. But if we can hit that a little harder, I think we have a chance.
So like as a leader, like when you're thinking about keeping your eye on the, like you're talking about Rick Ridgeway being very ambitious and having big dreams, but also being very practical. Like, I'd love to just hear more about how you think about your role as a leader, like whether it's lessons that you learned along the way that you're now applying, or just because to me, like the actual work is one thing, but being able to keep your head around it without like losing your mind. That's what, when I had Adam Kramer on, he just struck me as so calm and level-headed about it all, and not at all like we got it all figured out, but calm. And you're the same way. So, I mean, it's kind of a broad question, but just you as a leader, how do you think about all this? Like where you're going, the people that work with you on your team, your board. Can you tell me more about that?
I think for me, there's probably a couple things. One is you can lose your mind today. Like you said, there's so much coming at you. Is that I always have to remember why I do this. And for everyone out there, it's going to be different. For me, I wake up in the morning and I hop on my bike with my little boy and we go mountain biking, and the kids are what pull me forward. Like if you're going to have these opportunities in the future, I have to work my ass off today.
Yep.
It's not kids for everyone, right? It's so many different reasons, but I think we always have to come back to that. If it's your centering point or whatever it is, you have to always remind yourselves and give yourself some empathy on to be reminded and to take that seriously and to take those moments and not just continually push forward, but remember what that is. The other thing is that as a leader, my job is to drive forward the mission of the organization. And so with that, I cannot do that by myself, that there is a corpus of amazing advocates and people around me, that my role is to make sure that they thrive. And I actually find a lot of energy in doing that. I think we talked about that earlier too, is that, so it's a little bit of a look both ways. One of it is looking at, hey, what's pulling me forward? And then what is pushing me? And that's the people that I work with, and it's getting the right team and equipping them with the tools to be successful in their work.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to, I'm obsessed with this former Navy SEAL named Jocko Willink, and he writes these really amazing leadership books. And if you see him, I mean, he looks like a caricature of a Navy SEAL. But a lot of his leadership is so selfless and generous. And he just did a podcast the other day, and the whole theme was about, if you're worried about something, or you're down, or you need some advice, one of the kind of a fail-safe thing to think about is look around and be like, how can I help a person? Who can I help? And I think having a team that depends on you and you're there in your mind as one of your top priorities. And same with your kids. Like you're not the number one priority anymore at home or at work. And I think that's a powerful place to be. It has been for me, at least. And I just experience on the personal front, but
all the time. Yeah. I read that book, Extreme Ownership.
Yeah.
You recommended it to me, and I was
wondering because I recommend it. So I bought so many copies of that thing.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I got a good buddy who runs sustainability at PepsiCo, and we catch up monthly, and it was when things were really like insane this summer. And he's like, how are you doing this when you've got crazy work, you have a team, you got kids? He's like, I'm struggling as just a single dude to keep it all together. Uh-huh. And so to that point, it's like, yeah, it's stressful, but for me, focusing on what I can do, and I get the opportunity to create a future for my kids. I get an opportunity to support a team. It's that outward look that for me gives me so much energy to keep going forward.
Well, and it fits in, if you look back at your whole career, it's a service mentality. I mean, when you were studying, when you're in divinity school, that was because you wanted to serve the community, and that was the structure that would allow you to do it. And then you just think about every step, and there has been this common thread that I see. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's of trying to help. And I think there is a lot of energy to be found there, at least in my experience. You mentioned Rick Ridgeway. You mentioned Yvonne Chenard. I know on the board at Conservation Alliance, there's some real all-stars, amazing people across the full political spectrum. I'm curious whether it's on the Conservation Alliance or other people you've met, like the CEO of Rivian. Who are some of the other mentors that you've had, people that have helped you kind of become the person you are? Because I know there are a lot. I mean, are there one or two that come to mind?
Yeah, I've had a great privilege to have some amazing leaders. I mentioned my boss at Rivian, PJ Simmons.
Yep.
He's someone he's kind of similar. He's really good friends with Rick too.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. And so you have that similar kind of...
Did he work at Patagonia?
He did not. He started Corporate Eco Forum,
okay,
which is kind of like this consortium of sustainability leaders. And I know Rick was on the board. So he was one person who just taught me so much, both about pushing out and looking in.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think big? He's launched some big initiatives in his career, including the Rivian Foundation. And those are huge tasks, but also just the daily attentiveness. And he's the one who gave me the daily stoic, right? So it's like the daily attentiveness and what you're doing. And I think that was super helpful. RJ at Rivian, also different lessons learned, but like for me, in just terms of organizational leadership, he was great. It was like move fast, try, and don't be afraid to fail. Mm-hmm. We always had that kind of like a startup mentality, and I think it's like an engineering process, right? It's like you try something, you fail, you iterate. You try something, fail, you iterate. And that ability to be okay with failure is one thing that has been one of the best things that I've been okay with. It's hard, right?
That is hard. You hear it all the time, but the reality is a lot harder to get your head around if you really, really, really think about it or even more experience it.
It's one of the hardest things. It sucks.
It does at the beginning, but then you learn like, well, that's kind of the only way to do it.
Totally.
Really.
Yeah. And sometimes for that, I don't purposely fail in climbing, but I've actually had two peaks that I've tried to get to the top of in the past year where I didn't get to the top of the peak. And I'm so thankful for those opportunities, right? It's like, it's actually not about getting to the top. It's about who I was there and the journey to get along that way. So those are two leaders that come to mind.
Are you climbing much? Paul's a hardcore climber. You would go with me. This is crazy to even think about. It's crazy to think about, but we would go after work, me, you, and my wife, Kim, and usually one of your buddies, and we'd go up into Boulder Canyon and climb. But like the idea of doing that now, I love my daily life now. I love it, but just going at 6 p.m. and just cruising up in the mountains until dark, that just it's not in my world now. But you're such a great climber. I mean, hardcore, and you would put up with my 5'7", 5'8" on a good day, and you were so encouraging. How are you doing with getting out into the woods and doing the stuff that kind of drives all of your work?
Still getting out there, but it's different. Looks different. I don't push it as hard on the climbing front. That's a hard one just to organize schedules and everything with. But running, that's how we met, and that's still one of those things that you just need a pair of shoes and you can go out there and you can do it. And so trying to get out as much as possible. It tends to be more at like 4:35 in the morning because of all the pressures of life right now, but still getting out there. And those are those moments. And we talked about stress before we got on the podcast and just ways to deal with stress, good and bad. And getting out there and just having the silence is so important for me. Speaking of Ryan, do your listeners know about your obsession with Tony?
I'm nervous to get him on the podcast. Okay.
We won't talk about that.
I'd say our mutual obsession. When this is a little inside info. We were climbing the third flat iron. Again, Paul's like guiding me up and making me not be nervous and scared. And the great Tony Krapicka, ultra runner, came by and Paul said, "Hey, Tony." He said, "Do I know you?" By all accounts, he's like a really, really awesome, nice guy. And I'd love to get him on the podcast at some point, but I always give you... Remember he'd ride his bike by my house and be like, "Look, there's Tony."
There's Tony K. Yeah. But at least I said something to him. You were just starstruck, couldn't talk as he just scrambled past you in gym shoes.
Yeah, just running shoes and shorts.
Yeah.
And I have like on full gear, like I'm climbing Denali or something.
It's like,
helmet probably.
Ed, come back to me, man. Come back.
No, Tony K, if you listen to this, I know he's listened. He's promoted this. He's sent this out on his Instagram before.
You've made it.
No, you've made it because you're the guest, and he's going to be listening to you. He'll become a ambassador for your work. Books, we've mentioned a lot of the Patagonia ones. Extreme Ownership. It doesn't have to be about work or leadership or conservation. What books have been important to you?
So it's probably going to be a lot of the stuff that you have promoted or, talked about. Life Lived Wild, Rick's book is one of those.
So good.
So good. Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last.
Oh, yep.
One book I've read recently, and I should clause this, in that by the time I actually get my kids down to bed, normally I pass out in their room.
Sure.
Get kicked by my wife to wake up and make back in my bed. I read about a page a night. So I'm not on your train here, Ed. I read normal. American Wolf.
That's good. I read that a long time ago.
Good. Yeah. It was one of those books that it made me appreciate nuance in this world, because you've got the Yellowstone wolves, which as a nature lover, I'm, fascinated with a reintroduction. And then you've got biologists on one side, you've got ranchers on the other, and there's so much nuance to that conversation up there. I feel like that was a great way of challenging my thought in terms of the work that we're doing right now.
Yep.
In this world.
Dan Flores, who wrote Coyote America, American Serengeti, he's really, really cool. He's been on the podcast. I've gotten to know him. And that was like, one time I asked him for a good book recommendation. That guy, and he's like, that's the one you should read for that exact reason. Like, the wolf stuff's interesting, but I think I took the same thing away from it that you did, that there's just so much nuance to all this. And there is no right or wrong answer. It's just kind of this gray area in there where what's right for one person may not be right for another, and so it just reminds you like this is all super complicated. Anything I missed? Anything about the Conservation Alliance? I know that you guys are doing some stuff with 1% for the Planet, and so the episode that will have come out just before this one comes out is with Kate from 1% for the Planet. Can you talk a bit about how you guys are working together?
Yeah. So, the cool thing about both those are our organizations that they all started by Yvon Chouinard.
Isn't that wild?
So cool.
What about the impact that guy's had?
The trajectory of ideas 40 years ago and the impact that they've had is so phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about the long game. With 1%, we've always worked collaboratively with them. They recently joined on to our coalition, which we call Brands for Public Lands, which is a specific coalition of businesses. I think it's 150 or so now, that is adamant about public lands protection right now. So they came on board, and now we're starting to do a little bit of collaboration between our networks and really trying to bring together and amalgamate the businesses who have some sort of dependency or some sort of interest in nature, and getting them at the table, off the sidelines, to do some good work.
What's the challenges? It seems like that's kind of a no-brainer for a lot of people. I mean, what is it just people understanding that there's the opportunity to do it, getting the opportunity in front of them? Is that the challenge?
I think that the challenge is that there's a stigma associated with advocacy.
Okay.
In putting your name out there.
Yep.
And getting political. But what I think we've seen is that there's almost a greater risk now in not getting engaged, especially when we talk about the actual nonpartisan issue of public land and water protection. There's a bigger risk to not getting engaged. And so I think we're trying to overcome that stigma overall and getting people to jump in and giving them small opportunities to plug in, to sign on to a letter. Then you can go a little bit bigger. You can put some stuff out to your customers and you can push forward on that.
It seems like a very low risk way to kind of do it, the way that y'all are working together. So what did I miss? Anything, any final words of wisdom, anything you want to say to wrap it all up?
It's really cool to see what the large public is doing right now in terms of our really kind of coming down to, hey, what do we really care about right now and how are we going to stand up for this? And so appreciate the opportunity to get the word about that, what we're doing on the business side, and of course, trail running. Yeah.
Tony K. Well, you're the man, dude. Really, it's been so awesome to watch your whole career evolve. And there have been several people I've had on the podcast recently that I've been able to kind of watch their career evolutions, and yours has just been super inspiring. And I've had plenty, as well during our friendship last 15 years or whatever. And you've always been like a trusted advisor to me as I've kind of gone in and out of different phases. And even when you're not directly advising me, like I've observed what you've done, but more importantly, kind of how you've done it and why you've done what you've done. And it's been super helpful to me, like more than you realize. And so if people like the podcast, they can thank Paul, because without his influence, there would be no podcast. And so seriously, man, like if you think about when we started what I was doing versus now, it's a huge change. And I do credit like our runs, our climbs. There's like some very specific moments I can tell you about when we quit recording where I remember that it made me think about things differently. So anyway, I appreciate it. You're the man, and we'll do another one of these soon.
Sounds great.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.